Before we begin, please be advised that this story explores themes of intense psychological obsession and the unsettling unknown. Listener discretion is advised. It appeared without a whisper, without a tremor, without even the slightest shift in the stale, dust-mote-filled air of David Miller's forgotten attic. One Tuesday morning, nestled between a moth-eaten trunk of his grandfather's war medals and a stack of mildewed encyclopedias, it simply was. David, a man whose life was a meticulously catalogued library of historical facts and logical deductions, found himself staring at something that defied every single principle he held sacred. It was a box. Not a particularly large box, mind you. Roughly 12 inches cubed, perfectly symmetrical, and crafted from a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving it a flat, matte blackness that felt deeper than any shadow. There were no seams, no hinges, no visible latch, no keyhole, no lid line, no joinery whatsoever. It was a single monolithic object, an impossible cube of pure, unblemished obsidian. David, a history professor at a small, respected university in New England, had inherited the old Victorian house from his eccentric great-aunt Susan. He'd spent the last year meticulously clearing out decades of accumulated curiosities, each item catalogued, cleaned, and either donated or carefully stored. He knew this attic. He knew its every creaky floorboard, every cobweb-draped corner. He knew with absolute certainty that this box had not been there the week before when he'd been sorting through a collection of antique hat stands in the exact same spot. His first thought naturally was a trick, a prank. Perhaps one of his more mischievous students, knowing his penchant for order, had snuck in somehow. But the house was locked tight, an old fortress of oak and iron, secured with deadbolts and an alarm system he'd personally installed. More importantly, the box itself felt wrong. Not just out of place, but fundamentally wrong. He knelt, his knees protesting on the dusty floorboards, and reached out a cautious hand. The surface was cool, almost cold to the touch, and unbelievably smooth. It felt like polished stone, yet it had a strange, almost imperceptible vibration, like a faint hum resonating from deep within. He tried to lift it. It didn't budge. He braced himself, gritted his teeth, and pulled harder. Nothing. Not an inch. It was as if the box were rooted to the very foundations of the house, an immovable monument to an unknown purpose. Frustration, a rare emotion for the usually placid David, began to bubble. He was a man who understood how things worked. He understood physics, mechanics, and the undeniable laws of the universe. This box, however, was a blatant middle finger to all of it. How could something so seemingly simple be so utterly impenetrable? He spent the rest of the day and most of the night in a desperate, methodical dance with the object. He brought up his heaviest tools from the garage: crowbars, mallets, even a small hydraulic jack he used for car maintenance. The crowbar scraped harmlessly across the surface, leaving not even a scratch. The mallet bounced off with a dull thud that vibrated up his arm, but the box remained unmarked, unimpressed. The hydraulic jack, designed to lift several tons, strained and whined, its pistons groaning under the immense pressure. Yet the box remained perfectly still, a silent, mocking enigma. He tried every angle, every force, every trick he knew. He tried to slide it, to pry it, to chip at it. He even, in a moment of sheer irrational desperation, tried to smash it with a sledgehammer. The sledgehammer simply rebounded, the impact leaving David's arms aching and ringing. But the box stood impervious, its smooth black surface reflecting nothing but his own bewildered face. By midnight, David's attic, usually a sanctuary of historical contemplation, had become a battleground. Tools lay scattered, dust motes danced in the beam of his headlamp, and David himself, usually impeccable, was disheveled, sweat-soaked, and covered in a fine layer of grime. He sat back on his heels, panting, staring at the impossible object. This wasn't just a puzzle. This was an affront. He called his closest friend, Dr. Emily Carter, a materials scientist at MIT. Emily was brilliant, pragmatic, and had a healthy skepticism for anything that smacked of the supernatural. David, in his exhaustion, tried to explain it. "Emily," he began, his voice raspy, "I found something. Or rather, something found me. It's a box. A black box. And I can't open it. I can't even move it." Emily, bless her, chuckled. "David, are you sure you haven't been in the archives too long? Did you stumble upon a particularly stubborn antique safe? You know, sometimes those old mechanisms seize up." "No, Emily. You don't understand. There are no mechanisms, no seams, no visible joints. It's a solid block, and it's immovable. I just tried to lift it with a hydraulic jack rated for 5,000 pounds. It didn't budge. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David, Emily's voice was suddenly serious. Are you feeling all right? Have you been sleeping? He knew how it sounded. He sounded insane. I know, but I'm telling you, this is real. It's here, in my attic, and it's defying everything I know about physics. Emily, ever the scientist, finally agreed to come over the next day. Her curiosity piqued despite her disbelief. All right, David, but if this is just a particularly heavy coffee table, I'm going to make you buy me dinner for a month. The next morning, Emily arrived, her usual cheerful demeanor quickly replaced by a look of stunned disbelief as she confronted the box. She circled it slowly, her brow furrowed, her fingers trailing along its smooth, cool surface. She pulled out a small, high-powered flashlight and examined every millimeter, searching for the crack, the seam, the telltale sign of its construction. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. She brought her portable spectrometer, a device that could analyze the elemental composition of materials. She pressed it against the box. The screen remained blank. No reading, no data. It was as if the box didn't exist in the same material reality as her device. This is impossible, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Her scientific certainty, her bedrock of understanding, was crumbling before her eyes. My spectrometer can read the composition of a single grain of sand. It should be able to tell me what this is made of, but it's giving me nothing. It's not made of anything I've ever encountered. She tried her ultrasonic imager, hoping to map its internal structure. Again, silence. The waves simply vanished, absorbed or deflected in a way that defied explanation. It was a black hole for scientific inquiry. David, she said, finally pulling away, a tremor in her voice. I don't know what this is. I don't know how it got here. And I certainly don't know how to open it. But I do know one thing. This isn't just a box. This is an anomaly, a fundamental break in reality, and whatever is inside, if anything, must be equally impossible. Her words, intended to ground him, only deepened the unsettling feeling that had begun to fester in David's mind. The box wasn't just a physical object. It was a psychological one. It had become a silent, unblinking eye watching him, judging him, challenging the very core of his rational existence. In the weeks that followed, the box consumed David. His lectures became disjointed, his research neglected. He spent every waking hour, and far too many sleepless nights, in the attic. He researched ancient legends of impossible artifacts, obscure scientific theories, even esoteric philosophies. He tried sound waves, extreme temperature changes, focused lasers, everything he could conceive of. The box remained indifferent. His once orderly life began to fray. He stopped answering calls from colleagues, missed faculty meetings, and his once immaculate home slowly descended into disarray. Emily, worried, called frequently, offering to bring other experts, but David always refused. This was his mystery, his burden. He felt a strange, almost primal connection to the object, as if it had chosen him specifically. He started noticing things, small things at first. The attic light, which had always been reliable, would flicker erratically when he was near the box. Sometimes he'd catch a faint metallic scent in the air, like ozone after a lightning strike, only to have it vanish the moment he tried to pinpoint its source. He'd hear faint, almost imperceptible whispers, just at the edge of his hearing, when he was alone with it, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air around the black cube. He'd dismissed them as auditory hallucinations, products of his sleep deprivation, but they persisted. The whispers grew. Not distinct words, but a low, resonant murmuring, like a distant conversation in an unknown language. It was subtle, insidious, and it began to worm its way into his dreams. He would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom hum of the box still vibrating in his ears, a profound sense of unease settling over him. One evening, after another fruitless attempt to understand the box, David sat slumped against a stack of old books, defeated. The air in the attic felt heavy, charged. He looked at the box, its dark surface a void in the dim light, and for the first time, he felt a prickle of genuine fear. It wasn't just an inert object. It felt alive, sentient, and it was waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for him to give up, or perhaps waiting for something else entirely. He realized then that the box wasn't just challenging his intellect, it was challenging his sanity. It was a silent, unyielding force that had invaded his life, and he had no idea what it wanted, or what it truly was. He only knew this: he had to open it. He had to, because if he didn't, he feared it would open him. He had to open it. He had to, because if he didn't, he feared it would open him. The days that followed blurred into a relentless, agonizing cycle of futile attempts. Michael, a man who prided himself on his methodical approach to problem-solving, found himself utterly defeated by an object no larger than a shoebox. He started with the obvious, examining every seam, every corner, every surface for a latch, a button, a hidden mechanism. He ran his fingers over the polished, seamless exterior hundreds of times, feeling for the slightest imperfection, a give, a groove. There was nothing. It was a perfect cube, cold and unyielding, its dark, obsidian-like surface reflecting his increasingly haggard face back at him like a distorted mirror. He moved on to tools. First, a set of precision screwdrivers, then a jeweler's loupe, magnifying every millimeter of its surface. He tapped it, listened for hollow spots, for the telltale click of intricate machinery. Silence. He tried thin metal shims, attempting to slide them into the almost invisible join lines, but they met solid resistance, as if the box had been forged from a single unbroken piece of material. He even resorted to a high-powered magnet, hoping to detect ferrous components or a magnetic lock, but the box remained impervious, utterly unaffected. His apartment, once a sanctuary of order, began to reflect the chaos in his mind. Tools lay scattered across his living room floor, surrounded by crumpled engineering diagrams he'd sketched, desperate attempts to visualize an internal mechanism that simply wasn't there. Empty coffee cups piled up on his desk, and the faint metallic tang of his various experiments hung in the air. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, or rather couldn't achieve. When he did drift off, his dreams were filled with the box looming, whispering, sometimes even singing a low, resonant hum that vibrated through his very bones, leaving him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. His friend David Miller, a jovial, easygoing man with a penchant for bad jokes and classic rock, eventually noticed. Michael had been canceling plans, ignoring calls, and when he did pick up, his voice was strained, his answers short. David, worried, decided to pay an unannounced visit. "Mikey, you alive in there?" David called out, knocking on the apartment door. When there was no answer, he used the spare key Michael had given him years ago. He stepped inside, his cheerful demeanor faltering as he took in the scene. "Whoa, what happened here? Did a tornado hit? Or are you just auditioning for a role as a mad scientist?" Michael emerged from his makeshift workshop in the living room, his hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. He was wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt he'd been in for days. "David, hey, sorry, I've just been busy." David raised an eyebrow, gesturing around the room. "Busy doing what exactly? Trying to invent cold fusion in your living room? You look like you haven't slept in a week." His gaze landed on the box, sitting on a reinforced workbench Michael had dragged in, surrounded by more tools. "What's that? Some new art project?" Michael's eyes immediately darted to the box, a strange possessiveness flickering in them. "It's complicated." David walked over, a curious smile playing on his lips. "Looks like a fancy old jewelry box. What's the big mystery?" He reached out to touch it, but Michael's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Don't," Michael said, his voice sharp, almost a snarl. David recoiled, surprised by the intensity. "Whoa, easy there, Tiger. What's the deal? Is it cursed? Haunted by ancient spirits?" David chuckled, trying to lighten the mood, but Michael's serious expression didn't waver. I found it," Michael explained, his voice softening slightly, but the tension remained. "And I can't open it." David leaned in, intrigued. "Can't open it? Like the lock is jammed?" He picked up a magnifying glass Michael had left nearby, examining the box. "There's no lock, Mike. No hinges, no seams. It's just a box." He tapped it lightly with a knuckle. "Solid. What is it, obsidian?" "I don't know," Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've tried everything. Pry bars, drills, even a small amount of thermite, carefully contained, of course. Nothing. It doesn't even scratch." David whistled low. "Thermite? You almost burned your apartment down for a box? Mike, are you okay? This isn't like you. I know it's not, Michael said, his voice laced with frustration and a hint of desperation. But David, there's something about it. Feels important. Like it's meant to be opened but not by force. And it's driving me insane. He then recounted the story of how he found it, the strange compulsion, the unsettling feeling of being watched. David listened, his jovial expression slowly fading into one of concern. He picked up the box, turning it over in his hands. It felt remarkably dense for its size. The surface was impossibly smooth, cool to the touch, and absorbed the light rather than reflecting it brightly. I gotta admit, it's a weird one. No obvious way in. But driving you insane? Mike, you're not sleeping, you're not eating. This box is messing with your head. It's more than that, Michael insisted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sometimes when I'm alone with it, I feel like it's humming. A very low vibration, barely perceptible, but it's there. And the air around it, it feels different, heavier somehow. David shook his head. Buddy, I think you need a break. Let's go grab some food. Get you out of here. I can't, Michael said, his gaze fixed on the box. I'm close, I can feel it. There has to be a trick, a puzzle, something I'm missing. Over the next few days, David tried to help, if only to pull Michael back from the brink of total obsession. He brought his own set of professional-grade tools, including a borescope, hoping to find an internal cavity or mechanism. They spent hours together, meticulously examining the box, bouncing ideas off each other. David, while still skeptical of Michael's more outlandish theories, couldn't deny the box's baffling nature. It truly seemed impenetrable. They even tried sophisticated sonic testing, hoping to map its internal structure, but the results were inconclusive, a confusing jumble of dense, homogeneous material. As their efforts continued to fail, David's concern deepened. He saw the toll it was taking on Michael. The gaunt face, the haunted eyes, the increasing paranoia. Michael started talking about the box as if it were a sentient being, a silent observer. He claimed he could feel its presence, even when he wasn't looking at it. A cold spot in the room that seemed to follow him. What if it's not meant to be opened at all? David suggested one evening, watching Michael meticulously clean the box with a soft cloth, almost reverently. What if it's just a really well-made paperweight? Michael scoffed. No, nothing this perfectly engineered is just a paperweight. And if it wasn't meant to be opened, why the compulsion? Why the dreams? Why the feeling that it's waiting for something? He paused, his eyes narrowing. Or someone. He started researching ancient locking mechanisms, lost technologies, even esoteric societies rumored to possess impossible artifacts. He spent hours in online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, posting vague descriptions of his find, hoping someone, somewhere, might have encountered something similar. The responses ranged from ridicule to elaborate conspiracy theories, none of which offered any practical help. One night, after David had finally given up and gone home, leaving Michael alone with his tormentor, Michael had an idea. He had tried brute force, precision tools, thermal shock, even chemicals. What about vibration? He remembered a documentary he'd seen about ancient structures and their resonant frequencies. He set up a series of small, high-frequency transducers around the box, connecting them to a sophisticated audio generator, slowly sweeping through different frequencies. For hours, nothing. Just the subtle hum of the equipment. Michael was about to give up, his head pounding, when he noticed it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer on the surface of the box. It was fleeting like heat haze, but it was there. He adjusted the frequency ever so slightly, and the shimmer intensified. Then a sound. Not from the transducers but from within the box itself. A low, sustained tone, like a deep, resonant chord being played on an unseen instrument. The air around him grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. He leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The tone grew louder, a deep, unsettling hum that vibrated through the floor, up his legs into his very bones. The shimmering on the box's surface became more pronounced, swirling patterns forming and dissolving like liquid shadow. And then he saw it. A series of faint geometric symbols, previously invisible, began to slowly emerge on the box's surface, glowing with a soft, internal light. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, intricate and alien, arranged in a precise, deliberate sequence. The box wasn't just sealed. It was responding. It was alive. and it was showing him something. A key? A code? A warning? Michael felt a surge of exhilaration, quickly followed by a chill that ran down his spine. The box wasn't just a puzzle anymore. It was a communication, and he had no idea what it was trying to say, or what would happen if he finally understood its language. He had no idea what it was trying to say, or what would happen if he finally understood its language. The realization hit Michael like a jolt of pure electrical current, a profound shift in his understanding of the object that had consumed his life. The box wasn't a static enigma, but an active participant. This wasn't merely a puzzle to be solved, it was a conversation waiting to happen. The thought alone was intoxicating, pulling him deeper into its orbit. Sleep became a forgotten luxury, food an inconvenient distraction. His apartment, once a sanctuary of ordered solitude, transformed into a makeshift laboratory, a war room dedicated to a single, obsidian-hued adversary. He set up an array of sophisticated equipment, drawing on his engineering background and a surprising amount of his savings. High-definition cameras with macro lenses focused on every millimeter of the box's surface, capturing even the most fleeting microscopic shifts. Acoustic sensors, sensitive enough to detect the flutter of a moth's wing, were calibrated to pick up the nuanced spectrum of its subtle hums and vibrations. Thermal imaging cameras continuously scanned for any localized temperature fluctuations, while electromagnetic field detectors searched for unseen energies radiating from its core. He even repurposed an old spectrometer, hoping to analyze any light emissions, no matter how faint. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting to a bank of monitors that glowed with a chaotic symphony of data streams. Graphs pulsed, waveforms danced, and digital readouts flickered with endless numbers. Michael sat amidst it all, a man possessed, his eyes bloodshot, his mind a whirlwind of hypotheses and observations. He meticulously logged every anomaly, every subtle change, every rhythmic pulse. He was searching for patterns, for a Rosetta Stone hidden within the box's silent, yet increasingly vocal presence. The first few days were a blur of frustration. The data was overwhelming, a cacophony of white noise. He found himself chasing after phantom signals, correlating random environmental factors with the box's subtle shifts. His mind, starved of rest, began to play tricks on him. He'd see patterns in the static on a screen, hear meaningful intonations in the hum of his refrigerator. He questioned his sanity, his judgment, the very premise of his endeavor. Was he simply projecting meaning onto randomness, a desperate mind manufacturing a conversation where none existed? But then slowly, painstakingly, the chaos began to resolve into order. It started with the vibrations. He noticed that the box's hum wasn't a continuous drone, but a complex series of rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. These pulses varied in intensity, frequency, and duration. He isolated these patterns, using specialized software to filter out ambient noise. He discovered that certain vibrational sequences consistently preceded specific, almost imperceptible shifts on the box's surface. These surface shifts were perhaps the most mesmerizing. Under the magnification of his macro lenses, he observed that the obsidian-like material wasn't static. Faint, almost holographic geometric symbols would appear and disappear, not etched into the material, but forming within it, like fleeting energy manifestations. They were not always the same. Some were simple lines, others complex, multifaceted shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves before vanishing. And crucially, they were not random. A particular vibrational phrase would invariably be followed by a specific geometric pattern. Then came the thermal data. Localized temperature changes, often no more than a fraction of a degree, but precise and repeatable. A certain vibrational pattern followed by a surface symbol would almost always coincide with a sudden, minute spike in temperature on a specific quadrant of the box. It was a multi-layered communication, a symphony of sensory input, all perfectly synchronized. It was as if the box was speaking in a language that combined tactile, visual, and energetic components, all at once. Michael felt a renewed surge of exhilaration, eclipsing the previous chill. This wasn't just a puzzle, it was an orchestra. He began to build a massive database, cross-referencing every observable phenomenon. He mapped the vibrational sequences to the geometric symbols, and those symbols to the temperature shifts. He spent hours, days, weeks poring over the data, his fingers flying across keyboards, his mind racing. He saw repetitions, recurring motifs, almost like an alphabet forming before his very eyes. It was incredibly complex, far beyond any human-designed encryption he had ever encountered, yet it possessed an undeniable internal logic. As his obsession deepened, the box's influence seemed to spread beyond its immediate vicinity. Lights in his apartment would flicker erratically when the box's internal activity spiked. His phone would occasionally lose signal, or his computer would glitch, displaying strange, pixelated patterns on its screen that eerily resembled the geometric symbols on the box. He'd wake in the dead of night, not from a dream, but from a pervasive, almost physical pressure, a low thrum that seemed to penetrate the very walls of his apartment, vibrating in his bones. He knew it wasn't just his imagination. He had recordings of ambient electromagnetic fluctuations corresponding precisely to these moments. He was isolating himself, pushing away the few friends who tried to reach out. His sister, Emily, called occasionally, her voice laced with concern. He brushed her off, mumbling vague excuses about a demanding project. He knew he sounded unhinged, but he couldn't stop. The box had become his sole reality, his singular purpose. He felt like an archaeologist uncovering an ancient, alien civilization, piece by agonizing piece. Then came the breakthrough. After weeks of relentless analysis, he identified a distinct, complex sequence that repeated itself. It wasn't just a single vibration or a lone symbol or a solitary temperature spike. It was a perfectly synchronized combination of all three. A specific, intricate vibrational rhythm, followed by the manifestation and dissolution of a particular multifaceted geometric symbol on its surface, all culminating in a precise, localized temperature flux. This entire sequence, this multisensory event, would then repeat, sometimes immediately, sometimes after varying intervals. He labeled it the glyph pulse, convinced it was a foundational unit of the box's language, a kind of alien word or concept. It was the box's most consistent and complex output, appearing more frequently than any other pattern. He didn't understand its meaning yet, but he knew he had found something fundamental, a building block upon which the entire communication system was built. The initial exhilaration of this discovery, however, was quickly overshadowed by a chilling dread. The box wasn't just passively emitting signals. It felt like it was actively learning. He noticed that the glyph pulse often appeared after he had spent hours analyzing a particular dataset, almost as if it were responding to his focus, his questions. Sometimes, when he would verbally hypothesize a theory, the box would activate with the glyph pulse shortly after. It began to feel less like a mechanical device and more like an entity, an intelligence that was observing him, adapting its communication based on his actions and even, terrifyingly, his thoughts. The chill that had first run down his spine now settled deep within his bones, a constant, gnawing presence. The box wasn't just trying to tell him something. It felt like it was trying to tell him something specific, something urgent. And he had a terrifying premonition that understanding it might be far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. The realization settled over David like a shroud, heavy and cold. He stood there, frozen, the metallic tang of fear sharp in his mouth. The premonition wasn't a fleeting thought, it was a visceral certainty, a cold dread that coiled in his gut. Yet, despite the fear, an irresistible pull kept him rooted. The box, silent and inert on the table, now felt like a living entity, a silent predator waiting for him to make his move. He knew with an unsettling clarity that he couldn't walk away. Not now. The mystery had sunk its teeth too deep. He started small, cautiously. He moved the box from the center of his living room table to a secluded corner of his study, placing it on a small, antique writing desk he rarely used. He wanted it close, but not constantly dominating his space, a futile hope, as it turned out. The box, even when out of sight, occupied every corner of his mind. Its silent presence hummed in the background of his thoughts, a low, insistent frequency that drowned out everything else. David began to experiment, approaching the box with a scientific detachment he didn't truly feel. He tried different lighting, bright overhead, soft lamplight, complete darkness. He tried different sounds, absolute silence, classical music, white noise. He even tried different temperatures, though that was harder to control in his apartment. Nothing. The box remained an impenetrable enigma, its surface smooth, seamless, utterly indifferent to his efforts. But the whispers persisted, growing subtly louder, more defined. Whenever he was in the study, whenever his gaze fell upon the dark, metallic cube, they weren't words, not yet, but a complex tapestry of sound. A rustling, a distant murmur, a faint high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate not in his ears, but directly in his skull. It was like listening to a conversation through several layers of thick glass, unable to discern meaning, but acutely aware of the presence of communication. His sleep suffered. Dreams became fragmented, feverish mosaics of dark metal, and an oppressive, unidentifiable pressure. He'd wake in a cold sweat, convinced he'd heard a distinct word, a name even, only for it to dissolve into the murky depths of his awakening mind. The lines between reality and dream began to blur. David found himself neglecting his work, his friends. Calls went unanswered, emails piled up. His usual meticulous routines dissolved into a haze of restless pacing and intense, fruitless staring at the box. He barely ate, surviving on coffee and the adrenaline fueled by his growing obsession. He knew he was spiraling, but the gravitational pull of the box was too strong. It felt less like a choice and more like an imperative. One evening, deep in the grip of this compulsion, David decided to document everything. He bought a thick leather-bound journal and a set of fine-tipped pens. He began to meticulously record every interaction, every sensation, every fleeting thought that the box evoked. He sketched its dimensions, its texture, the way light played across its surface. He noted the exact times he felt the whispers intensify, the precise moments of his most vivid dreams. As he wrote, a strange pattern began to emerge, not in the box itself but in his perception of it. The whispers, he realized, weren't static. They seemed to ebb and flow with his emotional state. When he was frustrated, they intensified into an almost angry hum. When he felt a surge of curiosity, they became softer, more inviting, like a distant lullaby. It was as if the box was mirroring his own internal landscape, or perhaps subtly manipulating it. This realization chilled him to the bone. Was the box merely a conduit for his own subconscious, or was it an active participant, a silent entity capable of reading his thoughts, his fears, his desires? The thought was deeply unsettling. He was no longer just an observer. He was part of the experiment. He spent hours, days, weeks poring over every inch of the box, not just with his eyes but with his fingertips. He traced its smooth, cool surface, searching for any seam, any imperfection, any hidden mechanism. He used a magnifying glass, a jeweler's loupe, even a high-powered microscope he borrowed from a friend who was a retired science teacher, claiming it was for a personal project. He examined it under UV light, infrared light, trying every scientific method he could think of. Nothing. It was flawless, a perfect cube of unknown origin and material. But then, one particularly late night, fueled by a potent mix of exhaustion and a desperate surge of conviction, something shifted. David had been meticulously running his fingers over the top surface, almost rhythmically, lost in thought, when he felt it. Not a seam, not a button, but something infinitely more subtle. A faint, almost imperceptible ripple in the otherwise perfectly smooth surface. It was so minute, so fleeting, that he almost dismissed it as a trick of his weary mind. He pulled back, blinked, and ran his finger over the spot again. Nothing. He tried again, slower, more deliberately. Still nothing. His heart sank. He was cracking up, wasn't he? Hallucinating textures on an inert object. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. He closed his eyes, then opened them, focusing on the exact spot. He leaned closer, his nose almost touching the cool metal. He breathed out slowly, then with the very tip of his index finger, he lightly grazed the area. There it was again, a faint, almost electrostatic tingle, accompanied by a barely perceptible give in the surface. It wasn't a depression, but more like a localized shift in density, a momentary softness in the otherwise unyielding material. And just as he felt it, the whispers around him intensified, solidifying into a distinct, high-pitched hum that vibrated directly behind his eyes. He held his breath, his finger still pressed against the spot. He focused, pushing his intent into the subtle anomaly. He imagined the box as a locked door, and this ripple as the keyhole. He tried to will something to happen. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing. Then a sudden sharp jolt shot through his finger, up his arm and directly into his chest. It felt like a minute electrical shock, but without the pain, only an intense, vibrating energy. The hum in his head surged, becoming a cacophony of overlapping whispers, a storm of sound that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Simultaneously, the air in the study grew heavy, charged. A faint ethereal glow, almost like moonlight filtered through thick fog, emanated from the spot where his finger rested. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the room, but it was undeniably there, pulsing with a soft internal light. David gasped, tearing his finger away. The glow vanished instantly, the hum subsided to its usual background murmur, and the air returned to normal. He stared at his hand, then at the box, his heart hammering against his ribs. His hand trembled uncontrollably. He hadn't opened it, but he had activated something. He had found a point of interaction, a way to elicit a direct response that went beyond mere psychic resonance. The box wasn't just observing him, it was responding to him, and the response had been raw, powerful, almost aggressive. A wave of terror, cold and absolute, washed over him. This wasn't just a puzzle, it was a connection. He had touched something ancient, something alive, something that was now reaching back. He had peered into the abyss, and for the first time, he felt the abyss staring back, its gaze cold and unwavering. He knew with a certainty that froze his blood that he had just crossed a terrifying threshold. The game had changed, and he was no longer just trying to open the box. He was now intrinsically linked to it, a participant in a story he was only just beginning to understand. The box had just given him a glimpse of its true power, and the implications were far more horrifying than any locked lid could ever suggest. The air in Michael Thompson's study thickened, pressing down on him, stealing the breath from his lungs. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, overwhelming silence that had fallen. He stumbled backward, knocking over his desk chair with a clatter that sounded deafening in the aftermath of what he'd just witnessed. The polished wood of the box, now sitting innocently on the table, seemed to mock him, its surface reflecting the terrified distortion of his own face. He stared wide-eyed, disbelieving, at the object that had just shattered his reality. It wasn't just a box, it was a window into a nightmare that felt sickeningly personal. The fragmented images still burned behind his eyelids. The fleeting glimpse of a child, a young girl with bright, inquisitive eyes, playing in a sun-drenched park. Then the abrupt, jarring shift. The sun vanished, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating darkness. A struggle, a muffled cry, and then most horrifying of all, a hand. His hand. Reaching. Present. Not helping, not saving, but there. Implicated. A cold, clammy sweat broke out on his forehead. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the vision, to dismiss it as a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare brought on by weeks of obsession. But the feeling, the visceral dread, was too real, too potent. It clung to him like a shroud, chilling him to the bone. He opened his eyes, forcing himself to look at the box again, as if challenging it to repeat its performance, to show him the truth, or perhaps to prove it was all a lie. The box merely sat there, an enigma. Its intricate carvings seemed to writhe in his peripheral vision, the brass filigree glinting malevolently. He felt a profound, sickening nausea bubbling up from his stomach. Was he losing his mind? Had weeks of sleep deprivation and the relentless, maddening puzzle of the box finally pushed him over the edge? Or had the box, in its inscrutable wisdom, just shown him a horrifying truth he had somehow buried? A truth about himself he couldn't bear to face? He paced the small study, his mind racing, 1,000 questions colliding in a chaotic symphony of fear and disbelief. The child, the darkness, his hand, what did it mean? He had no memory of such an event. His past, while not perfect, held no dark secrets of that magnitude. He was Michael Thompson, a quiet man, a historian, a man who found solace in the dusty pages of forgotten texts, not in the chilling depths of a hidden personal horror. He stopped, his gaze falling back to the box. It was the source, the catalyst. If it had shown him this, it could show him more. Or maybe it was simply designed to drive its owner insane. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He wanted to throw it, smash it, burn it, erase its existence from his life. But a perverse, irresistible compulsion held him captive. He couldn't. He needed to know. He needed to understand what he had seen, and more importantly, what it meant for him. Slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a venomous snake, he moved back to the desk. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering over the box, not daring to touch it directly. His fingers twitched, yearning to connect, to trigger another vision, to demand answers. But fear held him back. What if the next glimpse was even worse? What if it confirmed the darkest suspicion festering in his mind? He pulled his hand back, pressing his palms against his temples. He needed to think, to rationalize, to find a logical explanation. The box was just an object. An ancient, intricately crafted puzzle box, yes, but still just an object. It couldn't conjure visions. It couldn't pluck memories from his subconscious, or implant false ones. It was impossible. Yet he had seen it. He had felt it. The cold dread, the piercing guilt, the sickening sense of being intrinsically linked. He knew with a chilling certainty that he could no longer simply try to open the box. That objective now seemed trivial, an infantile pursuit compared to the monstrous revelation the box had just offered. He had to understand the box itself, its history, its purpose, its previous owners. There had to be an explanation. There had to be a way to untangle this horrifying knot. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers fumbling on the keyboard. He started with the most basic search terms: ancient puzzle box visions, cursed artifacts history, boxes that show the past. The results were a predictable mix of folklore, urban legends, and fringe conspiracy theories. Nothing concrete, nothing that explained the visceral reality of what he had experienced. He refined his search, focusing on the specific aesthetic of the box. The dark wood, the intricate brass filigree, the peculiar, almost alien symbols etched into its surface. He remembered the antique dealer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose eyes had held a strange, knowing glint when Michael had purchased the box. He dismissed it then, attributing it to the dealer's eccentric charm. Now it felt sinister. Henderson Antiques, he typed, adding history and rare artifacts. He scrolled through local business listings, then broader databases. He found articles about Henderson, a respected but reclusive figure in the antique world, known for his uncanny ability to unearth truly unique pieces. But there was nothing about this box. No mention of its origins, no specific sales records that stood out. Frustration mounted, a slow burn beneath his terror. He was grasping at straws, trying to find a rational anchor in a sea of the irrational. He needed more. He needed to go back to the source. The next morning, Michael drove to Henderson Antiques, the box carefully wrapped and placed in a locked case in his trunk. He felt an irrational need to keep it close, yet simultaneously a desperate urge to be rid of it. The old shop, nestled on a quiet street in the historic district, seemed to hum with a different energy today. The usual comforting scent of aged wood and dust now felt heavy, almost oppressive. Mr. Henderson, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from behind a counter piled high with old books. His smile, usually benign, seemed to stretch a little too wide, revealing a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. "Michael, my boy, back for more treasures, are we?" Henderson's voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Michael cleared his throat, his voice feeling strangely tight. "Mr. Henderson, I need to talk to you about the box. The one I bought a few weeks ago." Henderson's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something, recognition, amusement, crossed his features. "Ah, the Solomon's Cube. A magnificent piece, isn't it? Still trying to open it, I presume." "It's not just about opening it," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady, to avoid sounding like a lunatic. It's more complicated than that. Have you ever had any strange experiences with it? Or heard anything about its history beyond what you told me?" Henderson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter, his eyes fixed on Michael. "Strange experiences? My dear boy, every truly ancient artifact carries a whisper of its past, some louder than others. As for Solomon's Cube, it's a collector's dream, a true enigma. Its origins are shrouded in legend, dating back centuries. Said to have belonged to a scholar, a man named Elias Thorne, who vanished without a trace in the late 19th century. Took his secrets with him, they say." "Elias Thorne?" Michael repeated, the name resonating with an unexpected familiarity that he couldn't place. "What kind of secrets?" Henderson chuckled, a dry rustling sound. "The kind that make good stories, mostly. Thorne was obsessed with hidden knowledge, with unlocking the mysteries of the mind. Some say he believed the box was a key to other dimensions, others that it was a repository of forgotten truths. He spent years trying to decipher its mechanism, convinced it held the answers to life's greatest questions. Then poof, gone. And the box reappeared decades later in an estate sale, untouched, unopened. And you never tried to open it yourself?" Michael pressed, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. Henderson shrugged. I appreciate the beauty of the unsolved, Michael. Some mysteries are best left that way. Besides, I have my own curiosities. He gestured vaguely around the shop, a silent testament to a lifetime of collecting the strange and the forgotten. But you seem to have a particular affinity for it, don't you? That's why I sold it to you. I saw it in your eyes. The hunger. The hunger. Michael felt a chill. Was Henderson implying he knew something? That he had seen this coming? Mr. Henderson, I need to know everything you know about Elias Thorne. Anything. Any writings, any journals, any other possessions that might shed light on this box, Michael pleaded, abandoning all pretense of casual inquiry. It's important. More important than you can imagine. Henderson studied him for a long moment, his gaze unblinking. The smile finally faded, replaced by a more serious, almost knowing expression. Elias Thorne was a man who walked a fine line, Michael, between genius and madness. He believed that certain objects could act as conduits, that they could resonate with the energies of the past, or even glimpse the threads of the future. He called them memory anchors. The box, he believed, was the ultimate memory anchor. Memory anchor? Michael whispered, the term striking a chord deep within him, perfectly described what he had experienced. Yes, he theorized that if an object was present at significant events, it absorbed a kind of psychic imprint. And with the right catalyst, that imprint could be replayed, experienced. He sought to create a device that could access those imprints. Some say the box was his greatest success, or his greatest failure. Henderson paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Are you seeing things, Michael? Things you can't explain? Michael hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, disturbing things. Things that feel real. And they involve me. Or seem to. A sigh escaped Henderson's lips, a sound of resignation. I feared as much. Thorne's journals, what little survived, spoke of similar experiences. Visions, fragmented memories, a blurring of his own reality with the box's imprints. He became increasingly isolated, convinced that the box was trying to communicate with him, to show him something vital. Or perhaps to consume him. Consume him. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. He believed the box wasn't merely passive. He thought it was sentient, that it chose its owners, guiding them, showing them what it wanted them to see, and that its ultimate goal was to draw its owner into a narrative, a story, from which there was no escape. Henderson's gaze was unsettlingly direct. He disappeared shortly after writing that, never to be seen again. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The box wasn't just showing him things, it was pulling him in. It was making him a participant, just as he'd felt the night before. This wasn't merely a puzzle, it was a trap. A carefully constructed, centuries-old trap, and he, Michael Thompson, had walked right into it. Do you have any of his journals? Anything? Michael pressed, his voice urgent, desperate. Henderson nodded slowly, a hint of reluctance in his eyes. I have a few fragments. Acquired them years ago, along with some of Thorne's other effects. Never thought much of them beyond their historical curiosity. But if what you're experiencing is real, then perhaps they hold more than just curious ramblings. They might hold a warning. He disappeared into a back room, leaving Michael alone amidst the dusty artifacts, each one now seeming to hold its own silent, ominous story. The air felt charged, expectant. When Henderson returned, he carried a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. These are Thorne's personal notes, Henderson said, laying it gently on the counter. Be warned, Michael. Thorne's descent into obsession, his blurring of reality, is palpable within these pages. He believed the box wasn't just a key but a door, and that once you stepped through there was no turning back. Michael's fingers trembled as he reached for the journal. The weight of it felt immense, as if it contained not just ink and paper, but the very essence of Elias Thorne's madness, and perhaps, his own impending doom. The box had given him a glimpse. Now he was about to dive headfirst into the abyss, guided by the fragmented writings of a man who had vanished trying to understand the same enigma. He was no longer just a collector. He was a detective, an unwilling protagonist in a story that threatened to consume him whole. The box had shown him a fragment of a nightmare, and now he had to piece together the terrifying truth, even if that truth led him to the same fate as Elias Thorne. The chilling image of that contorted face, the whisper that clawed at his sanity, refused to loosen its grip on Detective David Miller. He sat alone in his office, the precinct a low hum of activity around him, yet he felt utterly isolated, marooned on an island of terrifying knowledge. The rational part of his mind screamed for an explanation, for a logical framework to contain the chaos he'd witnessed. But the primal fear, the one that had nothing to do with logic, knew better. The box was real. The nightmare was real. And Elias Thorne was no longer just a missing person. He was a warning. Miller pushed himself from his desk, the fluorescent lights humming overhead suddenly feeling too bright, too clinical. He needed to revisit Thorne's apartment, not as a crime scene but as a puzzle. He'd gone over everything before, every book, every document, every stray note. But now he had a new lens, a horrifying filter through which to view Thorne's life. He was looking for what Thorne was looking for. He was looking for answers about the box. The apartment was still sealed, untouched since the initial investigation. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stagnation, a mausoleum of a life abruptly ended. Miller moved through the familiar rooms, the quiet amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. He went straight to Thorne's study, the nerve center of his brilliant, and perhaps unraveling mind. He ran his hands over the meticulously organized bookshelves, the stacks of scientific journals, the complex diagrams taped to the walls. Thorne had been a man of order, a seeker of patterns. What kind of pattern had led him to that box? Miller pulled open desk drawers, sifting through papers he'd already cataloged. Tax returns, utility bills, a few personal letters, nothing out of the ordinary. He checked for false bottoms, a trick as old as time, but found none. He tapped along the wooden panels, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. Frustration began to prickle at him, a dangerous feeling when confronting something so profoundly unsettling. He slumped into Thorne's desk chair, letting his gaze wander over the room, trying to see it not with police training, but with Thorne's eyes. What would Thorne have hidden from himself, or from others? His eyes landed on a small, ornate wooden box, a decorative piece, sitting on a high shelf amongst a collection of antique globes. It wasn't the same box, of course, but the association made him curious. He stood on a sturdy chair, reaching for it. It was heavier than it looked, intricately carved and locked. He carefully examined it. No keyhole was immediately visible. He ran his fingers over the carvings, a series of intertwining geometric patterns. One section felt slightly different, a subtle seam. He pressed. With a soft click, a small, almost invisible drawer slid open from the side. Inside wasn't jewelry or money, but a single leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages yellowed, the cover worn smooth from countless hours of handling. This wasn't a scientific log. The cover was blank, unpretentious. Miller carefully opened it. The handwriting inside was Thorne's, precise and elegant at first, but growing steadily more frantic as the entries progressed. The early entries were philosophical, exploring theories of consciousness, the nature of reality, and the possibility of dimensions beyond our perception. Thorne wrote about resonant frequencies, not in a purely scientific sense, but almost a spiritual one. He believed that certain energies, if properly focused, could cause a blurring of realities, allowing glimpses into other states of existence. Then the tone shifted. Thorne began to describe peculiar occurrences, shadows that seemed to move independently, whispers that no one else heard, fleeting images at the periphery of his vision. He meticulously documented these experiences, trying to find a scientific explanation, theorizing about subtle electromagnetic fluctuations or undiscovered psychological phenomena. But a few months before his disappearance, the entries took a terrifying turn. He wrote about an artifact, a device he believed could amplify these subtle energies, bringing the blurring into sharper focus. He called it the conduit. He described its construction, the unique materials, the intricate internal mechanisms that sounded disturbingly familiar to the box Miller now possessed. Thorne wasn't just observing. He was actively experimenting. He wrote about unlocking something ancient, something vast and indifferent. He documented the visions, the faces, the landscapes that weren't of this world. And then the fear set in. "It's not just showing me things," Thorne wrote in a shaky hand. "It's feeding. It's drawing from me. It wants more than just observation. It wants communion." A name appeared repeatedly in the later entries. Reed. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Thorne described her as a former colleague, a brilliant but reclusive physicist, one of the few who had ever entertained his more unconventional theories, even if only to debunk them. Thorne believed Reed held a crucial piece of the puzzle, a theoretical framework for the box's true power, something he had overlooked. He mentioned a specific paper she had published decades ago on interdimensional energy transfer, a concept widely dismissed by the scientific community. He was convinced she knew more than she let on, that she had glimpsed the same abyss he was now falling into. Miller closed the journal, his hands trembling. Reed. He had to find Evelyn Reed. A quick search revealed that Dr. Evelyn Reed had retired from the university years ago, disappearing from academic circles without a trace. It took Miller several hours, pulling favors and digging through obscure public records, to locate a remote property listed under her name. A cabin, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills, miles from the nearest town. It was exactly the kind of place a brilliant, reclusive mind might retreat to. The drive was long, the paved road slowly giving way to gravel, then to a barely maintained dirt track winding through dense forest. The silence of the wilderness pressed in, broken only by the crunch of his tires and the distant calls of unseen birds. The further he drove, the more isolated he felt, as if he was leaving the known world behind. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Finally, through a break in the trees, he saw it. A small, weathered cabin, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. A single ancient pickup truck sat in the overgrown driveway. He parked his unmarked sedan a discreet distance away, not wanting to startle her. As he approached the cabin, a sense of unease washed over him. The windows were dark, yet he felt watched. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. After a long moment, the door creaked open a few inches, revealing a sliver of a face. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her late 70s, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and intelligent, yet wary. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a thick woolen cardigan despite the mild outdoor temperature. "Can I help you?" Her voice was raspy, laced with suspicion. "Dr. Reed? My name is Detective David Miller. I'm investigating the disappearance of Elias Thorne." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Thorne? I haven't heard that name in years. What does his disappearance have to do with me?" "He mentioned you in his journal, Dr. Reed," Miller said, choosing his words carefully. "He believed you had some insights into his research." Her gaze hardened. Elias's research veered into the fantastical in his later years. A brilliant mind, yes, but he lost his way. I had no part in his delusions. She started to close the door. "He also mentioned a specific device, Dr. Reed," Miller pressed, holding the door open with his foot. "A box. He called it the conduit. He believed it could bridge dimensions." At the mention of the box, a subtle shift occurred in her demeanor. The wariness in her eyes intensified, replaced by a flash of something akin to fear. She paused, her hand hovering over the doorframe. You know about the box?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I do," Miller confirmed, his voice low. "I've seen what it can do. I've experienced it." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing, as if trying to discern the truth of his words. Finally she sighed, a weary exhalation. "Come in, detective. But understand, you're treading on dangerous ground." Miller stepped into a cluttered living room, filled with books, scientific diagrams, and strange archaic instruments. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid. Reed gestured to a worn armchair. Elias was obsessed. He believed in what he called interstitial spaces, the gaps between realities. He thought certain energies, certain materials, could create a bridge across these spaces. I humored him at first, gave him theoretical frameworks to poke holes in. But then he started showing me things. She walked over to a workbench covered in intricate tools and schematics. "He brought me a prototype years ago, a smaller version of what you're describing. Crude, unrefined, but even then, it possessed an undeniable resonance. He used an alloy, a metal unlike anything I had ever encountered. Its atomic structure defied known physics. I told him it was impossible, that the material itself was anomalous, perhaps even non-terrestrial." Miller felt a chill creep up his spine. "Non-terrestrial, meaning it shouldn't exist here," she clarified, her voice grave. I urged him to stop, to study the material, yes, but to abandon the device. I recognized the potential for something catastrophic. He wouldn't listen. He grew more secretive, more withdrawn. He believed the box wasn't just a receiver but an activator. He thought it could not only perceive these interstitial spaces but influence them. He was trying to open a door, detective. A sudden sharp crack echoed from outside, like a branch snapping under immense pressure, followed by a low guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the cabin. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. Reed gasped, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She clutched at her chest, her breathing shallow. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It followed you. Or it found us." Miller instinctively reached for his sidearm, scanning the dark windows. "What's here, Dr. Reed?" She ignored his question, her gaze fixed on something beyond the cabin walls. "He thought it needed a catalyst," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "Something to fully awaken its power. Not just human intent, but something more fundamental, something primordial. He was convinced he was close to finding it. He believed he could control it, command it. But you don't control something like that, detective. You only invite it in. And once it's in, it never leaves." Her words sent a fresh wave of dread through Miller. The box wasn't just a passive viewing device, a cosmic television. It was a key, a tool meant to pry open the very fabric of reality. And Elias Thorne had been trying to turn that key, to unleash something ancient and terrifying upon the world. The horror he glimpsed in the box was only a fragment, a prelude. The true nightmare, he realized with a sickening certainty, was only just beginning. The true nightmare, he realized with a sickening certainty, was only just beginning. David stood there, the key a cold, heavy weight in his palm. The image of that shifting, hungry void seared into his mind. Byrne hadn't just discovered something ancient. He had been actively, obsessively trying to harness it. The police, with their neat reports and their focus on motive and opportunity, would never grasp the cosmic horror of what Byrne had been attempting. They would label him a madman, close the case, and leave the true threat lurking, dormant but not defeated. David knew he couldn't let that happen. He had seen too much. He possessed the key, the very instrument Byrne had coveted. He was now inextricably linked to this terrifying secret. He had to understand. He had to find out what Byrne knew, what he was truly planning, and most importantly, how to stop it. His mind raced back to Byrne's apartment. The police would have sealed it, but David remembered the layout, the subtle oddities. Byrne wasn't just a recluse. He was a man consumed by a singular, dangerous purpose. There had to be more. More research, more clues, more of the twisted mythology he was trying to bring to life. He spent a restless night, the image of the box's interior flashing behind his eyelids. By dawn, a desperate resolve had hardened in him. He called Emily, fabricating a story about needing to retrieve a sentimental item from Byrne's place before it was cleared out by his family. Emily, still shaken by Byrne's death, reluctantly agreed to help him navigate the police tape, using her connections as a lawyer to smooth things over, albeit briefly. Under the guise of a grieving friend collecting a memento, David entered Byrne's apartment again, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air was still, oppressive, thick with the scent of old paper and something else. A lingering chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Emily waited by the door, providing cover, while David moved with a frantic urgency. He ignored the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom. His gaze fell immediately on the study, the room Byrne had spent countless hours in, surrounded by his esoteric texts. The desk was clean, but David remembered a loose floorboard near the bookshelf, an almost invisible seam he'd noticed during his initial, less focused visit. He knelt, his fingers tracing the pattern of the wood until they found the tiny, almost imperceptible gap. With a grunt, he pried it up. Beneath it wasn't a hidden safe, but a stack of leather-bound journals, tied with faded silk ribbons, and a heavy tarnished brass locket. He scooped them up, his hands trembling. "Got what I needed," he called out to Emily, his voice strained. "Thanks, Emily. I owe you." Back in his own apartment, the blinds drawn tight, David began to read. The journals were Byrne's lifeblood, his descent into obsession laid bare. They weren't just research notes. They were a chronicle of a man losing himself to a horrifying truth. Byrne had discovered the box not in some dusty antique shop, but through a clandestine network of antiquarians and occult enthusiasts. He'd learned of its existence, its true nature, and the legends surrounding it from a series of fragmented texts, some ancient, some disturbingly recent. The box, Byrne wrote, was not merely a container. It was a focal point, a conduit designed to bridge the gap between their reality and another, far older, far more inimical dimension. Its contents weren't a physical entity, but a presence, a formless consciousness that fed on discord, fear, and the unraveling of rational thought. Byrne's early entries spoke of fascination and academic curiosity. He described the box as a threshold artifact, a relic from an age when the boundaries between worlds were thin, when humanity was younger and more susceptible to the whispers from beyond. He believed that by understanding and manipulating the box, he could unlock profound truths, achieve enlightenment. But as the journals progressed, the tone shifted. The academic detachment gave way to a desperate, unhinged fervor. Byrne wrote about the Great Unraveling, a prophesied event where the veil between dimensions would thin to its weakest point, allowing the whispering darkness, as he called the entity within the box, to fully manifest. He believed this was not an apocalypse, but an ascension, a necessary purification of a flawed world. The key, David learned, was not just a simple opener. It was a tuning fork, an instrument designed to resonate with specific cosmic alignments. Byrne had spent years tracking astrological charts, ancient calendars, and obscure astronomical phenomena, searching for the precise moment when the key's unique frequency would align with the celestial energies, allowing the box to fully open, not just a crack, but a complete doorway. David flipped pages, his breath catching in his throat. Byrne had meticulously documented his progress. He wasn't just observing, he was preparing. He had designed a series of rituals, not for opening the box, but for sustaining the connection once it was open. These rituals involved specific geographical locations, specific dates, and, chillingly, specific energies. The journals hinted at the manipulation of human emotions, collective fear, and the harvesting of latent psychic resonance. Byrne wasn't working alone. The brass locket David had found wasn't just a trinket. Inside, beneath a faded photograph of a stern-faced woman, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of parchment. On it, a series of symbols mirroring some of the more complex glyphs Byrne had sketched in his journals, and a list of names. Not many, perhaps 8 or 9, but each name had an associated date and a cryptic note. Michael Thompson, resonance point identified. Jessica Miller, nexus candidate. David's blood ran cold. These weren't just random people. They were individuals Byrne had identified as crucial to his horrifying plan. Michael and Jessica. The names were too common to be certain, but the context made David's stomach churn. He scrolled further down the list. One name stood out, circled repeatedly, underlined in red. Emily Hayes, the anchor. Critical to stability. David dropped the journal as if it had burned him. Emily, his friend, the woman who had just helped him. Byrne had identified her, not as a target for the Whisperer, but as an anchor. What did that even mean? Was she unknowingly involved? Was she a pawn in Byrne's monstrous game? The full horror of Byrne's plan crystallized in David's mind. The box wasn't meant to unleash a monster that would rampage through the streets. It was meant to open a portal, a gateway for an insidious, unseen force to seep into their reality, slowly corrupting, slowly twisting, slowly devouring the very fabric of existence. And Byrne, in his twisted vision, believed he was ushering in a new age. The whispering darkness would not just arrive. It would be invited, stabilized, anchored into their world through specific individuals and rituals. Byrne's death wasn't the end of the threat. It was merely a setback, a temporary delay. He had been so close to turning the key at the precise moment of alignment. David looked at the key in his hand, then back at the journal, specifically at the last entry, dated just days before Byrne's death. It was a frantic, almost celebratory scrawl. The alignment is upon us. The true resonance approaches. The anchor is unaware. The candidates are prepared. The world will know true awakening. Solstice. The longest day. The veil will be thinnest. The summer solstice. That was only a week away. Byrne wasn't just preparing a ritual. He was preparing for a specific, imminent event. And Emily, Michael, Jessica. They were all part of it, whether they knew it or not. The true nightmare wasn't just beginning. It was accelerating, marching steadily towards an unstoppable climax. David felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones. He wasn't just an accidental witness anymore. He was holding the last piece of a terrifying puzzle, and time was running out. He wasn't just an accidental witness anymore. He was holding the last piece of a terrifying puzzle, and time was running out. The microchip pulsed with a cold, digital hum in his hand, a silent testament to a truth so monumental it threatened to shatter his entire world. David's mind raced, a frantic scramble of fear and adrenaline. This wasn't just about Michael anymore or a strange box. This was something vast, something insidious, and he had stumbled directly into its epicenter. He had to tell someone, anyone. His fingers fumbled for his phone, dialing Jessica's number on instinct. It rang once, twice, then clicked to voicemail. "Jessica, it's me, David," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Something terrible is happening. I found something. It's beyond anything we could have imagined. I can't explain over the phone, but you need to be careful. Don't go home. Don't trust anyone. I need to show you. Call me back, please, as soon as you get this. It's urgent. Life or death, Jess. Please." He hung up, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew he couldn't stay in his apartment. The feeling of being watched, a phantom chill that had been a subtle undercurrent since Michael's disappearance, now solidified into a palpable presence. He peered through the blinds, his eyes scanning the street below. A dark, unmarked sedan was parked across the street, its windows tinted, a figure barely visible in the driver's seat. It had been there earlier, he realized, dismissing it as a coincidence. Now it screamed surveillance. They knew. Somehow they knew. David grabbed his laptop, the microchip, and a small backpack with a change of clothes, his wallet, and his phone. He had to get out, and he had to understand what he was running from. He connected the microchip to his laptop, bypassing the initial encryption with the insights he gleaned from Michael's notes. The screen flickered, revealing a torrent of data that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just schematics for a device. It was a blueprint for a global network, an intricate web of energy conduits and data relays, all designed to interface with the mysterious box. The algorithms were mind-bogglingly complex, detailing a system for what? Energy manipulation? Information control? The technical jargon was dense, but a pattern began to emerge from the cryptic data files. He found geographical coordinates, hundreds of them, scattered across major cities and remote locations worldwide. Each coordinate was paired with a specific date and a repeating, chilling phrase, the Nexus Protocol. One date in particular stood out, highlighted in red, 3 days from now. And the coordinates associated with it were terrifyingly close to home, an abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of their own city. David felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. This wasn't just a prototype, it was an operational plan. The box wasn't merely a curiosity. It was a key, a central component in something massive, something that was about to be activated. The Nexus Protocol wasn't a theory. It was an imminent event. A sudden sharp rap on his apartment door made him jump, nearly dropping the laptop. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't the tentative knock of a neighbor. It was firm, deliberate, and utterly devoid of patience. He heard a muffled conversation, then another louder rap. "Maintenance," a voice called out, devoid of warmth. "We need to check a leak in the building." David knew it was a lie. His heart hammered. He glanced at the fire escape. It was his only way out. He quickly copied the most critical files from the microchip to an encrypted cloud storage just in case. He couldn't risk losing this data. He shoved the microchip back into his pocket, grabbed his backpack, and silently unlatched the window leading to the fire escape. As he slipped out, he heard the sound of a lock being forced, a splintering crack that echoed in the sudden silence of his empty apartment. He scrambled down the metal steps, his hands burning, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He hit the ground running, weaving through back alleys and dumpsters, his mind a blur of fear and desperate calculation. He needed to disappear, to become a ghost in his own city. He ducked into a crowded subway station, blending with the evening rush hour commuters. He felt eyes on him, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He caught a glimpse of a man in a dark suit, scanning the platform, his gaze too sharp, too focused. David pulled his hoodie lower, his pace quickening. He boarded a train just as the doors were closing, narrowly escaping the man's reach. As the subway rattled through the underground tunnels, David tried to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Michael's obsessive research, his frantic warnings, the cryptic symbol on the box, the names of the missing scientists. It all coalesced into a horrifying picture. The organization Michael had warned him about, the one that had silenced him, was not just a shadowy group of fanatics. They were sophisticated, powerful, and utterly ruthless. And they were about to initiate the Nexus Protocol. He remembered Michael's final desperate words. The truth, it's a burden, David, but it's also a weapon. Michael wasn't just building a device. He was trying to understand a threat, perhaps even trying to develop a countermeasure. The microchip wasn't just schematics for the box. It was the entire operational plan of the organization, a detailed roadmap to their global objective. The coordinates for the industrial park in his city flashed in his mind, along with the impending date. 3 days. What would happen there? What was the Nexus Protocol designed to achieve? Control? Power? A fundamental shift in global order? The implications were staggering, terrifying. David realized he wasn't just trying to solve a murder anymore. He was trying to prevent a catastrophe. He needed to get this information out to the right people. But who could he trust? The police? They would dismiss him as a conspiracy theorist, or worse, they might already be compromised. He was alone, hunted, and holding the most dangerous secret on the planet. He got off the subway several stops later, emerging into a bustling district he barely recognized. He needed a safe place, somewhere he could think, somewhere he could formulate a plan. He also needed to warn Jessica again, more directly. He couldn't risk her safety. He found a small, nondescript internet cafe, its glow a temporary shield from the shadows outside. He logged onto his encrypted cloud storage, double-checking that the files were secure. He then sent a coded message to Jessica's personal, secure email, one they had set up years ago for sharing sensitive work documents. It contained the coordinates, the date, and the phrase Nexus Protocol, along with a single urgent instruction: trust no one. Meet me at the old observatory midnight tomorrow. Bring the journal. As he sent the email, a sudden power surge flickered the lights in the cafe. The screens went dark for a split second, then came back on. But David felt a jolt of unease. It was too precise, too coincidental. He looked up, his eyes meeting the reflection of a man in the cafe window, standing casually on the street outside, staring directly at him. The man wasn't in a suit, but his posture, his intense gaze, sent a shiver down David's spine. They were closer than he thought. Much closer. He grabbed his laptop, his backpack, and bolted out the back door of the cafe, disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys once more. He had a destination now, a desperate rendezvous, and a terrifying ticking clock. He was no longer just running. He was moving towards the heart of the storm, armed with the truth that could either save the world or get him killed. The industrial park, the Nexus Protocol, and the rapidly approaching date loomed large in his mind. He had to get there, and he had to stop it. The world outside Michael's car window was a blur of neon and shadow, but his mind was crystal clear, racing through the implications of Dr. Eris's frantic whispers and the cryptic data he'd managed to salvage. The Nexus Protocol, the industrial park, the impending date. It wasn't just a project, it was a deadline, a countdown to something irreversible. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the engine roaring as he pushed the old sedan to its limits. He'd almost made it out of the city when the first sign appeared. A black SUV, nondescript, but moving with a predatory precision that mirrored his own urgency. It wasn't just following, it was tracking. His phone, still clutched in his hand, vibrated with an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then slammed it onto the passenger seat, the screen flashing an ominous red before he crushed it under his heel. No calls, no GPS. He was off the grid, a ghost in the machine. He swerved off the main highway, taking a series of increasingly narrow, unlit county roads, the gravel spitting beneath his tires. The SUV, a relentless shadow, stayed with him. Adrenaline surged, sharpening his senses. This wasn't just about a stolen box. This was about something far larger, something they were willing to kill for. He remembered Eris's last words, garbled but insistent. They don't understand the resonance. The containment field. It's a living thing, Michael. A living thing. The box. It wasn't just a container for some rare element. It was designed to suppress something, to hold back a force that, if unleashed, would rewrite the very fabric of existence. The Nexus Protocol wasn't about opening the box. It was about harnessing what was inside it, manipulating its raw, untamed power. He took a hairpin turn, tire screaming, then cut his headlights, plunging the road into absolute darkness. He knew this area from his youth, a maze of forgotten backroads and overgrown trails. The SUV, caught off guard, overshot the turn, its headlights momentarily painting the dense tree line before correcting. Michael used the precious seconds, veering onto a nearly invisible dirt track, the sedan bouncing violently over roots and rocks. He didn't look back. The truth, pieced together from Eris's desperate warnings and the fragmented files, hit him with the force of a physical blow. The element within the box wasn't merely a new energy source. It was a fundamental component of reality, a quantum anomaly that could be manipulated to alter causality itself. The Nexus Protocol was a grand, terrifying experiment designed to create a global interconnected field, a network powered by this anomaly. Its stated goal: to eliminate all system failures, all inefficiencies, all chaos. Its real goal: absolute, undeniable control over every aspect of human life, from thought patterns to global events. They weren't just building a new world. They were reprogramming the old one. The industrial park loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and concrete silhouetted against the pale glow of the pre-dawn sky. Barbed wire fences topped with motion sensors, guard towers casting long, watchful shadows, and a constant hum of unseen machinery emanating from within. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a launch pad. He ditched the car in a dense thicket of trees a mile away, grabbed the worn backpack containing the few fragments of data he'd saved, and moved like a phantom through the underbrush. The air grew colder, heavy with the metallic tang of industry and an unsettling, almost electric hum that vibrated deep in his bones. This was it, the heart of the storm. He remembered a detail from an old geological survey map Eris had shown him: a forgotten drainage tunnel beneath the perimeter, marked as collapsed but actually just overgrown. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. He found the entrance, partially obscured by rusted corrugated metal and thorny vines, the air inside thick with the smell of damp earth and stagnant water. He squeezed through, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Inside, the tunnel was a winding, claustrophobic nightmare. He moved by feel, his hands scraping against rough concrete, his breath echoing in the oppressive silence. Above him, the faint thrumming grew louder, a low-frequency rumble that seemed to resonate with the very core of his being. He wasn't just entering a building, he was entering a living, breathing machine. Finally, a faint glow appeared ahead, a grate rusted but intact, looking out into a brightly lit, sterile corridor. He pried it open with a loose piece of rebar he'd found, the screech of metal painfully loud in the confined space. He slipped out, heart pounding, into a world of polished floors, gleaming pipes and silent, watchful cameras. He moved quickly, staying close to the walls, relying on instinct and the layout he'd glimpsed in the fragmented blueprints. He passed laboratories filled with humming equipment, data centers where rows of servers silently processed unimaginable amounts of information, and security checkpoints manned by heavily armed guards. He was looking for the Nexus chamber, the core of the operation where the box would be. The hum intensified, growing into a deep, resonant throb that seemed to vibrate through the very air. He followed the sound, deeper and deeper into the complex, past doors marked with ominous symbols he didn't recognize. The sense of dread tightened its grip. This wasn't just about power, it was about something far more existential. He found it, a massive circular chamber, bathed in an eerie blue light. In the center, suspended by a matrix of pulsating energy conduits, was the box. Not a simple metal container, but an intricate obsidian cube, its surface swirling with faint iridescent patterns that seemed to shift and writhe, like trapped starlight. It was larger than he'd imagined, easily 10 feet on each side, radiating an almost palpable energy. And around it, a symphony of machinery, a colossal apparatus of gleaming chrome and intricate wiring, all focused on the suspended cube. Towers of crystalline conductors pulsed with blue light, feeding into a central column that rose towards the ceiling, disappearing into the unseen upper levels. This was the Nexus. A holographic display shimmered nearby, showing a complex schematic of the entire planet, crisscrossed with glowing lines that converged on the industrial park. Below it, a countdown timer blared in stark red digits: 00:07:42:11. 7 hours, 42 minutes, 11 seconds. That was the deadline. That was when the protocol would go live. He watched horrified as technicians in pristine white suits moved with practiced efficiency, making final adjustments. He overheard snippets of conversation, chilling in their casual tone. Phase 3 resonance stable. Global network integration at 98%. Initiating final containment field modulation for release. Release. That was the word that struck him like a bolt of lightning. The box wasn't meant to be kept closed forever. The Nexus protocol was designed to open it, to unleash the reality-bending energy contained within, not just to power a network but to reconstruct it, to impose a new perfect order. He saw a figure, tall and imposing, standing before the main console, his back to Michael. Dr. Elias Thorne, the man who had funded Eris's initial research, the visionary behind the Nexus protocol. He was speaking into a comms unit, his voice calm, measured, utterly devoid of doubt. "The world is a chaotic, unpredictable system," Thorne said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "But chaos is merely order we don't yet understand. The box provides the fundamental constant, the truth behind all truths. And with the Nexus, we will finally impose that truth. No more uncertainty, no more mistakes. A singular, unified consciousness guided by absolute efficiency. The ultimate evolution." Michael felt a cold dread spread through him. A singular, unified consciousness. It wasn't just about control, it was about erasing individuality, erasing free will. The box wasn't just a power source. It was the key to unlocking the very fabric of human perception, to rewrite everything. He saw a monitor displaying a live feed of the countdown. 00:07:39:58. Time was running out. He had to do something. He had to stop it. But how? He was one man, deep inside a high-security facility, against a force that sought to control the very essence of reality. As he moved to find a way to disrupt the process, a sudden alarm blared, piercing the heavy hum of machinery. A red light flashed, pulsing erratically. "Intruder detected in Sector Gamma 7. A voice boomed from the loudspeakers. Michael froze. They knew he was here. He was no longer just an observer, he was a target. The hunt was on, and the fate of reality itself hung in the balance. He had to move, and he had to move now. Michael's blood ran cold. The overhead lights in the sterile corridor seemed to flicker with his racing heartbeat. Gamma 7. They knew his designation. They knew him. The air crackled with a sudden oppressive energy, the kind that precedes a storm. He could hear distant alarms wailing, a low guttural thrum vibrating through the floor. This wasn't just a security breach anymore. It was personal. He was the target. He didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged, sharpening his senses. He bolted, not in a blind panic, but with a calculated desperation. He remembered the layout of the facility, the schematics he'd painstakingly memorized from countless hours of surveillance. His mind raced, mapping escape routes, choke points, potential hiding spots. He knew the maintenance tunnels, the rarely used service shafts, the forgotten veins of this metallic beast. He veered sharply into a utility corridor, the fluorescent hum giving way to the rhythmic clank of unseen machinery. Footsteps pounded behind him, growing louder. A guttural shout echoed. "Sector 4 lockdown initiated. Intercept subject Gamma 7. The voice was distorted, metallic, devoid of human inflection. It was a command, not a plea. Michael didn't look back. He squeezed through a narrow crawl space, ignoring the dust and cobwebs, the metallic tang of ozone in the stale air. He could hear them now, just on the other side, their frustrated grunts as they realized their quarry had vanished. He pushed deeper, his lungs burning, the claustrophobia a dull ache beneath the urgent need to survive. He emerged into a cavernous, dimly lit chamber filled with humming generators and thick, insulated pipes. The air here was heavy, charged with static. He was disoriented for a moment, the sheer scale of the machinery overwhelming. Then he saw it. A small, unmarked access panel, half hidden behind a stack of industrial crates. He knew this panel. It led to a sublevel data exchange, a place he'd marked as a last resort. With fumbling fingers, he yanked the handle. It resisted, then gave way with a screech of rusty hinges. He slipped inside, pulling the panel shut behind him, plunging himself into near-total darkness. The only light was a faint, pulsating green glow from a distant terminal. He moved towards it, his heart still hammering against his ribs. This wasn't a main control room, but a diagnostic station. a forgotten nerve ending of the colossal system. A single console blinked expectantly. He remembered the basic access codes he'd gleaned from a low-level technician's forgotten notes. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate dance with fate. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The screen flickered, displaying lines of cryptic data. He bypassed security protocols, digging deeper, searching for anything related to Gamma 7. The first hit wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a person, but a project. Project Gamma 7, Reality Stabilization Protocol. Status: critical, ****. Michael stared at the words, a cold dread seeping into his bones. Reality stabilization? He scrolled frantically, his eyes devouring the technical jargon, piecing together the horrifying truth. The box. It wasn't just an artifact. It was a nexus, a conduit to the fundamental fabric of existence. For centuries it had remained dormant, an enigma. But the world, it seemed, was not as stable as humanity believed. There were flickers, micro-anomalies, temporal distortions, the very glitches Michael had been witnessing. These weren't random occurrences, they were symptoms. Symptoms of a reality fraying at the edges. The box, according to the data, was the only thing capable of interacting with these anomalies, of restitching the fabric of reality. But it required a unique interface. A human consciousness specifically attuned to its resonant frequency. And that, Michael discovered with a sickening lurch, was where he came in. He found his own name, buried deep within the project logs. Subject Initiator Gamma 7 Michael Sterling. Unique neural resonance detected upon initial contact with Artifact 001, the box. Primary candidate for interface protocol. Current status: uncontained. Initiating recovery protocol. He was the initiator. His attempt to open the box, that fleeting touch, hadn't just been an accidental discovery. It had been an activation. He had woken something up, and in doing so had become inextricably linked to it. The facility hadn't been watching him out of curiosity. They had been monitoring a crucial component of their desperate, world-saving, or world-ending project. Though they weren't malicious overlords perhaps, but desperate scientists, driven to the brink by the impending collapse of existence. Their methods were extreme, their secrecy absolute, but their goal, ostensibly, was to save everything. But at what cost? And what did interface protocol truly mean? He scrolled further, finding a Phase 3 document. This was the chilling part. Phase 3 Full Reality Recalibration. Requires stable subject initiator. Warning: potential for localized reality collapse if initiator connection is severed or unstable during recalibration. They weren't just stabilizing reality, they were recalibrating it, rewriting it. And if he was the initiator, his consciousness was the key. His perspective, his very being, would be the template. What if they made a mistake? What if he made a mistake? The implications were staggering, terrifying. He wasn't just a pawn. He was the control rod of a cosmic reactor. A sudden clang echoed from the corridor outside, followed by muffled voices. They were getting closer. He had only moments. He needed to download this data to expose them, to understand enough to fight back. He frantically initiated a data transfer to a small, encrypted drive he carried. As the progress bar crept agonizingly slow, a new log entry flashed across the screen: recent, urgent. Anomaly spike detected. Artifact 001 exhibiting uncontrolled fluctuations. Initiator interface required immediately to prevent cascade failure. All personnel to Sector Delta 9. Bring subject Gamma 7 to containment chamber. Michael's blood ran cold again. The box wasn't just fluctuating. It was spiraling out of control. And they needed him to stabilize it. Or, more accurately, to sacrifice his consciousness to it. The data transfer completed with a defiant chirp. He snatched the drive, his mind a maelstrom of fear and resolve. He wasn't going to be their puppet. He wouldn't let them gamble with reality, not with him as the collateral. He knew where Sector Delta 9 was. It was the deepest, most heavily guarded part of the facility. The rumored location of Artifact 001 itself. The core. He had to get there, not to be captured but to confront them, to understand the true nature of the box, and perhaps to stop whatever catastrophe was unfolding. He heard the heavy footsteps approaching the access panel. No time to escape the way he came. He scanned the room, his eyes darting. Another, smaller panel leading to a ventilation shaft, barely large enough for a person. It was a desperate gamble. He pried it open, the metal shrieking in protest. He squeezed inside, the shaft cold and gritty against his skin. He could hear them now, right outside, their voices growing louder, closer. "He's not here. Check the sublevels." He crawled, pushing himself forward, the darkness oppressive, the air thick with the smell of dust and old machinery. He had to reach Delta 9. He had to reach the box. The shaft opened into a narrow catwalk, overlooking a vast circular chamber. Below him, bathed in an eerie, pulsating blue light, was a massive, intricate containment field. And at its center, shimmering with an impossible, shifting light, was the box. It wasn't a simple wooden chest anymore. It was a crystalline structure, throbbing with energy, its facets twisting and reforming as if reflecting 1,000 different realities at once. Around it, scientists in specialized suits moved with frantic urgency, their faces grim. Security personnel stood guard, weapons at the ready. Michael saw a familiar face among the scientists, Dr. Eris Thorne, the man who had given the initial presentation about the box, the one who had seemed so detached, so academic. Now Thorne's face was etched with desperation, his eyes fixed on the pulsating artifact. As Michael watched, a section of the chamber flickered. Not just the lights, but the very wall, dissolving into a momentary cascade of shimmering pixels before snapping back into solidity. A collective gasp rose from the scientists. Thorne shouted, his voice echoing. "The fluctuations are increasing. We need Gamma 7. Now!" Michael knew he had to act. He couldn't let them use him. He couldn't let them gamble with the universe. But as he took a step forward on the catwalk, a metallic clang echoed behind him. A guard, his face grim and determined, stood at the entrance to the shaft, blocking his only retreat. And below, Thorne looked up, his eyes locking onto Michael. "There he is," Thorne roared, pointing. "Subject Initiator Gamma 7. Do not harm him, but secure him immediately." Alarms blared anew, louder, more insistent. Michael was trapped, suspended between the frenzied scientists below and the armed guard behind him, with the reality-shattering box pulsating ominously in the center of it all. The fate of everything he knew, everything that was, rested on his shoulders. He was at the precipice, and the only way out was through. He had to reach the box, but how? And what would happen if he did? The answer, he knew, would either save reality or shatter it forever. He knew everything that was rested on his shoulders. He was at the precipice, and the only way out was through. He had to reach the box, but how? And what would happen if he did? The answer, he knew, would either save reality or shatter it forever. The air around Michael crackled, not with static, but with the sound of existence itself tearing at the seams. Buildings shimmered, then dissolved into swirling motes of light and shadow, only to reform as distorted echoes of forgotten structures. Time itself buckled, showing him glimpses of moments that had never been, and futures that would now never arrive. He saw a version of himself laughing with Jessica, a life he'd almost had, then it was gone, swallowed by the void. He saw his childhood home, not as it was but as a blueprint, a collection of possibilities. The world was screaming, a silent cosmic agony, but through the chaos, an impossible stillness persisted. A gravitational pull, not physical but existential, tugged him forward. The box. It was no longer a distant enigma, but the undeniable center of this collapsing universe. It called to him, not with a voice, but with a presence, a singular, unwavering point in the maelstrom. He moved, driven by an instinct beyond fear or reason. The ground beneath his feet was an illusion, shifting from solid concrete to liquid light, then to pure abstract thought. He phased through spectral walls, climbed stairs that led nowhere, and navigated corridors that wrapped back on themselves. Each step was a battle against unreality, each breath a conscious act of defiance against the encroaching nothingness. He was shedding layers of himself, of his perception, of his very understanding of what it meant to exist. The Michael who had started this journey was long gone, replaced by a raw, exposed consciousness, tethered only to the singular purpose of reaching the box. Finally, the chaos began to recede, not vanishing but coalescing, forming a vast inky void. And in the absolute center of that void, floating in an impossible silent expanse, was the box. It was precisely as he remembered it, yet utterly transformed by its context. Impossibly black, impossibly smooth, devoid of any seam or mark, it pulsed with a faint internal light, the only beacon in the infinite darkness. It was the eye of the storm, the anchor of all that was, and all that might have been. He reached it. There was no ground, no air, just the box suspended. He extended a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against its surface. It was cold, yet vibrated with an unseen energy. It was solid, yet felt like pure potential. He pressed his palm against it, pouring all his will, all his desperation, all his questions into that single point of contact. "Open," he whispered, his voice thin and reedy in the cosmic silence. "Please open." He tried to force it, to break it, to pry it apart with sheer mental effort. He remembered every theory, every legend, every desperate attempt others had made. He imagined keys, ancient mechanisms, hidden triggers. He pushed and pulled, pleaded and demanded. Nothing. The box remained impassive, an immutable truth in a universe of lies. A wave of despair washed over him, colder than the void itself. He had come all this way, faced down impossible odds, only to be met by the same impenetrable silence. Reality was dissolving around him, and he had failed. As the despair threatened to consume him, something shifted, not in the box but within Michael. A memory surfaced, not of a specific event but of a feeling. The feeling he'd had the first time he'd seen the box, the feeling of profound, unsettling completeness. And then a realization, sharp and sudden, like a lightning strike in the dark expanse of his mind. The box wasn't a container. Not in the way he understood containers. It wasn't meant to hold something inside that needed to be accessed. Its unopenable nature wasn't a lock, but a fundamental property, a definition. The box was the boundary. It wasn't a vessel for reality but a filter. A cosmic sieve that allowed one singular, coherent reality to coalesce from an infinite sea of possibilities. Every choice not made, every path not taken, every alternate version of existence, all of it churned in the chaos outside this boundary. The box kept it all from spilling over, from overwhelming the delicate structure of this reality. Its purpose was not to reveal, but to contain the infinite, to define the finite. And the instability, the unraveling of everything, wasn't caused by the box itself, but by the relentless collective human obsession to open it, to force the unknown into the known, to breach the protective membrane between what is and what could be. Every attempt, every desperate theory, every story whispered about its secrets, had created a psychic pressure, a tear in the fabric of that filter. It was like trying to scoop the ocean with a sieve. The box wasn't broken. It was being overwhelmed. Michael understood. The answer wasn't to open the box, but to mend it, to reinforce the boundary, to cease the futile, destructive quest for a truth that was never meant to be accessed directly. But how? He was just one man, a single consciousness in a universe on the brink. He looked at his hand still pressed against the box. His journey, his unique path through the unraveling reality, had attuned him to its frequency. He had seen the chaos, understood its source, and felt its pull. He was, in a way, a part of the breach, and perhaps also the repair. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to open the box. He didn't try to force anything. Instead, he simply accepted. He accepted its nature, its purpose, its impenetrable mystery. He allowed his consciousness to merge with the feeling of the box, not as a separate entity, but as a willing component. He became a temporary patch, a conscious reinforcement for the cosmic filter. He poured his understanding, his acceptance, his profound, newfound reverence for the unknown into the box. He became one with its stillness, its purpose, its silent, unwavering truth. A profound calm settled over the void. The swirling chaos outside the box didn't vanish, but it began to slow, to coalesce, to find its equilibrium. The spectral echoes of buildings solidified. The shimmering became a gentle glow. The tearing sound softened into a low hum. The impossible stillness of the box propagated outwards, like ripples in a cosmic pond, pushing back against the encroaching dissolution. He felt a deep, resonant hum within him, as if his own being had found its true frequency. He was no longer Michael, the man searching for answers. He was Michael, the man who understood the nature of the question, and accepted the beauty of its unanswerable truth. Slowly, gently, the world began to reform. The void around the box receded, replaced by the familiar hues of a sky, the solid ground beneath his feet. The chaotic remnants of shifting realities faded into the background, becoming faint, almost imperceptible flickers at the edge of his vision. He was standing on a familiar street, the scent of rain-soaked asphalt in the air. The box was gone, or rather, It had receded into its true conceptual form, its essence now woven back into the fabric of a renewed, restabilized reality. He blinked, disorientation washing over him. The world was whole again. The buildings were solid, the people walked with purpose, the sky was a consistent blue. He saw Jessica walking down the street, her laughter echoing in the distance. Everything was as it should be. But it wasn't. Not entirely. Michael looked at his hand. The faint hum was still there, a ghost of the cosmic resonance. He saw the world, but he also saw its seams, the delicate threads holding it together. He saw the choices not taken, the alternate paths, the infinite possibilities that still churn just beyond the box's unseen boundary. He saw the fragility of it all, the immense silent effort required to maintain this single coherent reality. He understood the profound, terrifying power of the unknown, and the delicate balance between curiosity and destruction. The box was still unopenable. Its mystery remained, but Michael no longer sought to open it. He understood its purpose, and in that understanding, he found a new kind of peace and an unbearable burden. He had saved reality, not by unlocking its ultimate secret, but by embracing the fact that some secrets were meant to remain sealed, protected by an unyielding boundary. He walked forward, a man who had seen beyond the veil, who carried the hum of the universe within him. He would live his life, but he would never truly be the same. He was a guardian of the unseen, a silent witness to the most profound truth, that reality itself was a carefully curated illusion, held together by an impossible, unopenable box, and guarded by the quiet acceptance of its eternal mystery. The world was safe for now, but Michael knew, deep in his soul, that the allure of the unknown was a powerful, dangerous force, always pressing against the boundary, always whispering at the edges of the box.